Awesome. Thank you for coming in and doing this interview. You've got this marvelous background of contribution and amazing science, and of course, really contributing to the global healthcare environment. So again, thank you. And I really appreciate this.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you for having me.
So awesome. What are some of the inflection points in your life that made this wonderful person and career that you have today? And it could have been when you were 3 or 5, inside the family, outside, in school, outside school. It could have been early career moves, etc. What were those magic moments that made you who you are?
Oh, wow. That's a wonderful question. I appreciate the opportunity. I'll try to keep it brief. There was probably like five or six that come to mind immediately, but I'll give you the top two or three if I can. So one is I think I kind of fell naturally into the world of healthcare because I came from two physician parents. Like there's no denying that South Asian two physician parents, all the stereotypes might have played out in ways that I cannot deny, even if I tried. But it's actually just a testament. They were hardworking. Some of my earliest memories are visiting my mom during her residency while she was staying overnight in the hospital. So I probably caught that bug early. So that was probably formative in kind of heading down the healthcare track. But then also, interestingly, something caused me to deviate from it pretty starkly. There's a program called the Texas Boys State Program that I actually participated in when I was a senior in high school. And it's something that I'm headed to Austin tomorrow for my 25th year participating in the program. And it's something that teaches civic duty and servant leadership. And it's a civics kind of minded program, but at the same time, it instilled in me this kind of servant leadership as well as public policy type mindset. So much so that even though I had pursued medical school after undergraduate, I felt compelled to pair it with a joint degree in public policy. And then 2 or 3 years ago, I also found myself applying for the Presidential Leadership Scholars Program and spent some time at the Bush and Clinton libraries alongside that program. And so it's been a theme that I think started me on the journey of public service as well as public policy type of bent in healthcare. And then lastly, I don't know where I kind of randomly during my time at McKinsey when I was a consultant got staffed on a project, and this was very much unplanned. I was staffed as the engagement manager to lead the IT infrastructure of the Arkansas Payment Improvement Initiative. And at the time, what's really stark about that, without worrying about any of the background for your listeners, is I didn't know what the term IT architecture meant or infrastructure. I literally had to admit, like 2 weeks into the engagement, I don't know what this is about or what I'm doing. And, fast forward a decade later, it was the start of kind of a love affair of like, wow, a system, a technology, a digital app, a computer program could do so many of the things for us, and we're just not using it right. And so that was, I think, the inflection point that very soon after that, I fell in love with the idea of startups and started my first company, then went to work back at a healthcare system, leading digital innovation, and then now my second startup here. So I think those three are pretty kind of telling story points in my life. So thank you for a wonderful question.
Well, that's really fascinating. So having been raised in a medically oriented family, that kind of really set your path, and then of course you continue that in your education, right? With your at Duke and Harvard, and also into the public side, the public good side. And this presidential leader scholar program, I thought that's really fascinating. Can you tell me a little bit more about the Texas Boys State program, because you
Sure.
volunteered for them, and that was so instrumental as you indicated. So tell us a little bit more about that program.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't do my program justice if I didn't plug, and it's not just me now. There is a Academy Award winning documentary on our program. It's called Boyd State, and it was on President Obama's top watch list a couple of years ago when it came out. If anybody wants to watch that, that does a much better job of explaining it because it's kind of hard to explain. But think of it as kind of a mock UN or mock United Nations, but it's high school rising seniors pulled from all sorts of different high schools, as many as we can get, and where we definitely don't get enough that we touch in Texas here. And it pulls the top 2 or 3 students recommended by their counselors into a week-long program. And 48 of the 50 states, I believe, have their own program. So this is the Texas Boys State program, and they're all a little bit different. Some focus on elections the first day and then governing, and then they do the mock rolls of those government officials, governor all the way down to dog catcher. For the Texas one, it's actually more about the electoral system. So they form parties, make-believe ones, not Democrats and Republicans, but the boys are placed arbitrarily into Federalists and Nationalists, and then they run a mock election where they have to get nominated for their party in a primary first and then head off. And at the end, we elect at the very last day and announce it. And so it's less about actually doing the work, but teaching them what it takes to get involved and be elected to office or appointed in different places. So it's this fast-paced microcosm of America, but it's also a microcosm in the sense that Texas is a massive state. So there's very, rural kids from 2A high schools that, have 20 people in their class, and there's kids from 6,000 high school count people, and that are blue chip athletes or master debaters or different things. And so it's just a really fascinating thing that the theme has always drawn me back to it, which is servant leadership. So teaching those kids that leadership, and there's a lot of different, mantras and schools of thought of leadership, but I think the presidential leadership program very much also espoused this servant leadership theology that I really admire and has stuck with me for years.
A part of my interviews is that I do sort of active brainstorming as well. And you talk about servant leadership. Have you ever met Stephen Shia? He has J&B Medical, and
No, I haven't.
Yeah, some of the most prominent medical companies in the U.S. I mean, their family is founded in about 18 of them. So I can see a lot of kinship because he leads with servant leadership all the time, and he's definitely expanding what he's doing in the medical space. I'm going to see him in a few weeks, so I'll mention what you're doing and the fact that you lead with this idea of servant leadership. Anyways, so you talk about the fact that you got this introduction to IT. You realize, oh my God, it's wonderful. I mean, you can do digital and then drive all of this stuff, right? So and enable, and it can scale, and it has all of these kind of capabilities. And you did a startup, right? And then you re-entered back into sort of the more sort of traditional career space. Can you talk about that first startup and what were some of the lessons from that first startup?
Yeah, I mean, the first and foremost lesson was startups are hard and they will bruise your ego, because I think one thing that I take from it and I offer to everyone is, up until that point, I think I was very much on this kind of checkbox career trajectory that I don't deny by any means. Like people that go to the schools that I went to, pursuing, a top medical school, then pursuing Harvard relentlessly, then applying multiple times to McKinsey and getting in and learning what that's like. These are things that are obviously very hard and ambitious, but at the same time, they're kind of, in some ways, their own pathology, right? You got to keep striving for that thing. I think startups in some realms, and I was part of the San Francisco office of McKinsey, so it was around me, but I was somewhat oblivious to it. I do think it was a rite of passage and a checkbox for some consultants, but not necessarily all. But one thing that it taught me was to really let go of your ego on many of these things, because once you take an investment, and then in that time it was mostly friends and family and other things, the level of responsibility you feel for that, and the amount of putting your hand out in front of people, whether it's for investors, whether it's customers, whether it's other things, like I think that it separates people who are willing to do that sort of thing and are not. And interestingly, I had my second startup. So my first startup, I was a co-founder, but I didn't play the CEO role. So I didn't do the primary fundraising and other things. But one of my biggest hesitancies before I was about to jump out to my second startup, Amenities, current one, was I built for that? And I think it was this misguided misbelief that, oh, I'm not built for that. I think a lot of people think that, like, I'm not a seller, I'm the ideas or the product or the technology or the medical person. And I think that's malarkey. That's ridiculous. And I was very fortunate. Part of the success that I very easily attribute to the fact that I've gotten much further in the second startup is also just the success of people around me. So the first time, it was pre-pandemic. I was a startup in fintech, not located in New York or San Francisco. These are massive handicaps. And then I'll be honest, my physician background was more perplexing to most investors than anything else. Like, why are you in fintech? You're a doctor. And it was very confusing to people. The second time around, not only did I could stay in Dallas and have Zoom meetings with 100 plus venture capitalists instead of having to move out to San Francisco and New York. I think that was a fantastic outcome of the pandemic, is the remote work. The fact that we're having a conversation today instead of, me having to fly out somewhere. It's super convenient for both of us. But the other thing was, I was like, obviously the physician and healthcare technology was a lot more congruent for people, but I had two very good friends who had done very well in their own startup. So one had just recently IPO'd. It was a college roommate, and one was a med school very good friend who was leading a company that had raised several $100 million. And that network, their network, and they're willing to vouch for me, was a massive difference. And I don't think people talk about that often, is that so very much I attribute a big chunk of my success was the success of the network around me that had grown up and done their own things that opened doors for me. And I think we dismiss that too often in this entrepreneur mindset set of like, I made it on my own. Like, so many doors were open for me that were just dumb luck of the circumstances of the second time around. So I think those were lessons that I took, and I look at very soberly, and again, in this kind of macro policy level as well.
Yeah, I mean, having any experience with a startup sort of is it really gives you the reality of a startup, right? And all the pieces that make a start. And you have to be resilient and agile, and you have to be very flexible. You have to be willing to work really, really hard and focus. And so you bring all of those lessons into your second startup. But before we do that, you just mentioned earlier that you're at McKinsey Health Systems, and you were advising multiple U.S. health systems on strategy, operations, and technology. Can you talk about some of the experiences there and some of the lessons from that? And then, of course, prior to your startup, you were then you were with you were the digital health office out Baylor Scott and White Health as the VP digital health. So I want to sort of go through your career arcs, and then we'll then kind of center on your current startup.
Sure. So, McKinsey was an unbelievable training ground. It has its faults, and I think John Oliver's documented some of them, which are not completely unfair. But at the same time, I recommend to anyone who's considering, especially folks who don't know what they want to do with their life, well, you're not going to get a better skill set network than McKinsey. Literally, there's no parallel place in the world, I don't think. But the thing that I learned the most that was new to me and shocking, and that I tried to make, it is still puzzling to me, is how little coming out of medical school I understood about U.S. healthcare, and the fact that there are so many doctors running so many things in healthcare that don't have a McKinsey training in that, to me, is shocking. I have a good friend who was also my classmate, but found himself as the CEO of a hospital. And one day I asked him, how are you possibly trained for this? Like, you did a residency in emergency medicine. I didn't do a clinical residency, but I always say my residency was in U.S. healthcare systems at McKinsey. That's where I learned about which service lines make money, the P&L, the economics, the strategy, the org design, and all of these things. And to just throw physicians into that because they're doctors, I think is just wildly unbelievable to me, like borderline irresponsible. And we just assume, oh, you're a physician, you know how the front line works. It's interesting. I don't think we do that in any other place. Now, that's not to say there aren't physicians who are going to make great managers, but just to say, yeah, you wouldn't be like, hey, family medicine doc, let's try surgery tomorrow. You just would never do that. And yet we do that with healthcare systems all the time. So that was really interesting. And it's where I learned how healthcare works. And even to this day, I have obviously great friends who are, career physicians who their frustrations are so interesting to hear about, because in many ways, they're obviously very attuned to the burnout and the pain of the frontline worker in healthcare, but they're in many ways also completely oblivious to the dynamics that are at play. Like, for example, I hear primary care physicians all the time say, why aren't we investing in primary care? That's clearly the heart of doing good medicine, and these things that sound really good. But when you understand, and right, wrong, or indifferent, I'm not endorsing this, but the reality of the U.S. healthcare system is primary care is a loss leader to surgeries and procedures downstream, which fund the entire healthcare system. Only about 6 service lines in most healthcare systems are profitable. The rest are mission driven or meant to have a balanced entire academic medical center. And so those realities are lost on them, they wouldn't be asking, why are we not investing in primary care? Because you don't, it takes a very specific strategy to want to invest in a loss leader that is really funding a downstream referral network instead. And so with being completely oblivious to that, they find themselves in career arcs fighting uphill their entire career, just not knowing that the fundamental assumption that they're making, that primary care is good medicine, why aren't we investing in it? That's not how decisions are being made in the boardroom and in corporate structures that they're, again, not familiar with. So that was really eye-opening, and it's something that I carry with me. Everything about the startup amenities and my work at Baylor in the digital health office was housed in that. And I'll give you another example from Baylor. I think people have been asking for many years, like, we have all of these remote monitoring technologies, that why aren't we doing this? Oh, I can do my blood pressure at home. I don't have to drive and see my doctor, and they can just watch it. And the reality is, after extensive time trying to be not just the buyer, but the one who is championing and bringing in remote patient monitoring technologies into Baylor Scott and White, and then I'm sure other people have met this frustration, it finally became clear to me. RPM is a technology looking for a business case inside of healthcare that has none. There was not a single wide use of remote patient monitoring technologies that had financial justification for the health system because of the current makeup of things. And that's or current setup. And even in value-based care, which is immediately where people would point and say, well, if you had a holistic payment, then you would be incentivized to do those things. Actually, no, only in the highest cost Medicare Advantage models would you actually have that, because the trade-off of the technology and the people staffing it and the monitoring of those alerts and other things would be offset by the large amount that they would otherwise consume by coming into the hospital. If you trying to justify remote patient monitoring technologies on a population that is relatively young and healthy, you're only adding cost and you are not reducing any bit of cost. So the reality is that I think understanding the baseline financial economics and premise of an industry is so critical. And yet I just find in so many things that I'm evaluating, it's just completely oblivious, because we go on these heuristics of like, oh, that sounds good, we should do it. Like, even the concept of care management, having a nurse call you to see how you're doing, to make sure that you picked up your meds, that's great, right? It sounds good. And every health system has hundreds, if not dozens, of care managers. And when you look at it and like, think about how many phone calls do you pick up today? And then you realize, wait, I'm staffing 200 nurses that are outbound calling with 1 in 8 people answering the phone these days. And so it's not a cost effective. It hasn't been proven in many ways to reduce cost. And yet the entire industry premise of value-based care installs care management as a fundamental premise. And I've never understood that, because it sounds good, but it's never actually been shown or proven in a lot of ways to reduce a lot of cost at scale. And so those are things that training is all grounded in economic evaluation at McKinsey, but I've carried it throughout both my time as an executive, evaluating technologies and opportunities, as well as now in my newest startup amenities.
That's really interesting, because people don't realize, as you mentioned, sort of the economic framework for all of this, and, does it make sense? And then you see a lot of sort of misdirected funding, right? And because of your McKinsey background, you have a medical background, you were the VP of Digital Health, Baylor Scott and White, and in fact, you helped in this, overseeing the development of this really amazing app, right? The MSBSW Health app, which had over 1 million or 500,000 new patients get care, and equal to half all new patients for BSWH, right, during that time period. So all of that experience, you know what, you and Stephen Shai, I'm telling you, you'd have a field day talking to each other, because you both are touching the medical system. And Tim Pletcher, I don't know if you know him, but he led this whole digital program in Michigan. I can see, if you got together with some of these folks, if you don't know them, you could co-create amazing stuff. Okay, so this led you then to be the founder and CEO of Amenities, right? So my audience now is quite mixed, right? There's kind of like hardcore IT people in my audience, scientists and experts in that area, but there's also CEOs and investors and people like that. But because of who I am, the audience tends to kind of be more weighted on the CEO investor side. So you got to break it down so it kind of makes sense to them. What's the value of amenities? Why did you form it? Why did you
Yeah,
start up?
I appreciate it. So amenities is really now my professional thesis. After a decade in healthcare, technology, uh, healthcare systems, public policy, all that kind of mix that we've already just discussed, I've come to a couple of fundamental conclusions that are my own. So I'm not speaking for anyone else, and definitely anyone else I've worked with before, because I know many people would strongly disagree with those. There's fundamental problems in healthcare. The cost is one. However, I have unfortunately very low answers or optimism of us reducing the cost curve. And that's because everyone's doing really well. They don't like to admit it. We pay a lot of lip service to this, but when costs go up, those are dollars into the system. And so people aren't really incentivized. There's all these, everyone quotes massive opportunities to do AI. And I struggled with all of those. I personally set fire to $10 million in pursuing robotic process automation at Baylor. And the problem was never the technology. It was people understood that that is job reduction and they would slow play it. And in healthcare, for whatever reason, we tolerate a lot of slow playing of adoption of technologies. So I don't have very much optimism on cost. Quality is too opaque for me. I mean, there's no physician I've ever met that will allow themselves to be judged by quality measures that are not showing them in a great light already, kind of thing. So I don't know. I just don't know how to do it well as a system level. The thing that I do not understand why there's a disconnect, and I'm trying to fix that, is patient experience. So patient experience, just like customer experience in every other industry that faces patients and customers, should be king, and it is not. I would argue we have skyrocketed costs the last decade and somehow plummeted patient experience. Everything is harder to navigate. There are fewer appointments. It takes eight months to get this appointment. Apps are even harder to utilize. Open scheduling. I can get the rarest cuisine in the world delivered to my door in 30 minutes or less, and here in Dallas Fort Worth, but I can't find a doctor's appointment. I have friends who ask me, hey, who's a good doctor in Houston or in Dallas? And I'm like, oh, it's so funny that you asked a basically unknowable question in today's world. Or how do I get an appointment? Basically, I say go buy One Medical because it's the only way I know of for sure in major markets for you to get an appointment tomorrow. Everywhere else, good luck. Other than Dallas Fort Worth and other than bswhealth.com, Baylor Scott and White, because at Baylor, we fixed that. And so I think that the premise that I was too long-winded about was, if you fix patient experience, you can make the first movers to do so will be massively financially rewarded. And hopefully that starts the flywheel of actually fixing it everywhere, showing healthcare systems that delighting patients is good business is the transformative thesis of my professional career at this point. And it is also the premise of amenities. The name amenities, as you might see, somewhat implies what I'm doing, which is I'm trying to provide healthcare systems with this hospitality-like view of how to create their patient experience. Now, that doesn't mean for me, big screen TVs in the hospital room. I'm talking about the healthcare system end to end, from birth to death, serving a patient. And what we found is a couple of things. So one, healthcare systems make roughly like 50 cents on the dollar inside of healthcare, all the dollars spent in the US, meaning they are the ones that are going to receive the end 50% of the dollars. There's pharma, there's insurance companies that take the other kind of parts of it. But if they're going to be the mainstay players, that's who you have to work with. Direct-to-consumer health is nice, but it's largely reserved, unfortunately, for skincare, erectile dysfunction, and luxury items like cosmetics and other things. People have insurance, they want to use it on the primary things, and that's not going to be entirely consumer-driven unless it comes from trusted brands locally, like large healthcare systems. And that those healthcare systems do not in any way today compete on patient experience. And amenities are designed to help them not only compete on patient experience, but discover how profitable that could be. And so that's really the premise. And so what we do, therefore, is one, when we think about obviously one of the best and most loyal customer experiences in the country, Amazon, healthcare has been aspiring to create the Amazon Prime of healthcare for a decade plus with almost nothing to show for it. I think for me, the two big things that they do really well that we really try to mimic is one is frictionless experiences. So they obsessively think about one-click purchase or subscribe so you don't have to think about this again. healthcare systems don't even have websites that function. They look like 1980s WordPress sites. Literally, the doctors are in alphabetical order. Poor Dr. Ziad is just getting screwed at the bottom of that provider search. Will never get a new patient because they can't even resort them. So we do provider search, registration, and a comprehensive digital experience. That's what we did at Baylor. And just those things, we're going to talk about the other half of it second. Just those things, as you pointed out earlier, led to 500,000 net new patients in an 18-month period. And now 1 in every 2 patients that comes into Baylor comes in through those digital channels. So it has become e-commerce overnight. It's as if, Walmart overnight got Walmart.com. And every other healthcare system in the country is just left in shambles, building their own kind of websites and very poor mobile experience that is the default kind of patient portal of the world. So that's one thing we do, is just the bread and butter digital tools and solutions that health systems need, instead of them all building it themselves, which is unfortunately the status quo. There's some structural reasons why they do that, but a lot of it is frankly internal ego. The marketing person or the IT person wants to build it themselves, and it's just not a good scalable way to do things. But the other half of Amazon that I really pay attention to, and it's not just Amazon, but Costco and basically every other thing in our life, is subscription memberships. And I think this makes a lot of people in healthcare uncomfortable. The idea that we're already paying so much, now you're going to ask patients to pay more. Well, the reality is everywhere we turn in our lives, we pay a premium for a premium experience. If you love Spotify, you pay for Spotify. If you want Amazon music without the commercials or things, you pay the extra for it. And so I think the same is true of healthcare. Is right now we've done 6,000 plus patient surveys around the country, and we haven't found a single patient that's loyal to one health system only. So every patient is cheating on every health system. And we think that memberships is a way to create an incentive where health systems see demonstrably the loyalty that they could get if they invest in the patient experience. And the last thing I'll tell you is what goes into that membership is not obvious. I think we left Baylor because there was a big movement at Baylor to do home services, because the prior CEO was really interested in that concept. And we were like, yeah, we'll do in-home vaccinations, in-home services, in-home labs. Well, when we asked patients, what do you want? Those tested the lowest. It wasn't zero. They were like, yeah, that's nice, but they tested the lowest. And when we started testing new concept that we hadn't considered, not surprisingly now in hindsight, but it was surprising at the time, was all of the financial protections came to the top. The number one problem in healthcare for U.S. patients is cost. Health systems think it's access. They obsess, we have a director of access, we have a person who's trying to shuffle, the doctors don't want to open their schedules, when in reality, cost is the number one thing, and we just ignore it. It's not our problem. Yeah, we have revenue cycle teams. We do just enough what the government makes us do, but it's not our problem. We have to charge. In fact, we're trying to raise prices because our costs are going up too. The reality is you can do a lot. No surprise billing guarantee, satisfaction guarantee, transparent cash pay pricing. And so those are the memberships that we help design, build, and launch and manage for health systems, because I don't think they have the right perspective on what's going to delight patients or the willingness often to go there. I mean, we talked to one recent healthcare system about this, and they said, yeah, the costs come up in all of our surveys too, but that's kind of antagonistic to us. Are we really going to help patients with no surprise billing that's coming from us? And my answer is, hell yes. That's exactly what you need to be doing. Amazon didn't offer 2-day shipping because they love buying a bunch of trucks. And it was a great idea for them to create a fleet of their own delivery vehicles. They did it because that was the number one pain point in e-commerce, was I don't want to wait for it. Well, to do 2-day shipping, we're going to have to invest in this massive network, but it was such a difference maker. It made Amazon Prime an indispensable membership for 176 million Americans. And health systems are just not yet willing to go there, and we're going to try to help get them there.
So, that's really, really interesting. So you are improving the customer experience, really the population experience, right? With the medical system. So that's kind of one factor. You're providing them sort of with thoughtful access that they could control from providers and sort of the entire ecosystem. You're trying to get them to have a better idea to manage their own costs, because that's a personal sort of impact on them. And you created a membership subscription model so you can do sort of handholding and and really manage that experience. So it's going to be a better experience. And through subscriptions, then you can provide those kind of guarantees, right? So, and there's models out there that work. And you're saying, why don't we implement those kind of models in the healthcare system, because it's needed, right? And so do you work with partners then who could then sort of mass onboarding of the consumer base into your digital membership platform, that's amenities platform, or is this sort of a combination? You get the word out, and people just self-register. I mean, what's your sort of go-to-market strategy?
Yeah, so for us, it's very much through health systems. So amenities is somewhat of an invisible brand. We are B to B to C. In other words, we help the health system build their membership package. And we do that for a couple of reasons. One is, think about, so as much as I've just kind of dogged on healthcare systems, the one thing that I will easily give them is they deliver life-saving, necessary care throughout the United States. So even if it sounds like I'm down on them, it's harsh love, because it's from a place of we can do better. But the reality is they also have incredible brands. And the reason I say that is, think about if you lived, I'm making this up as an example, but you lived in Palo Alto and you had two doctors as a choice, a Stanford doc and another doc, just does independent. Who's the better doc? And you're like, oh, the Stanford one, because Stanford's a great name. You know, you can pick Hopkins, you can pick Ohio State, whatever you want, right? So their brands carry value. In fact, I would argue that's what a healthcare system is today. It's a brand uniting a lot of disparate operators of ambulatory care services, of hospital administration, of therapy centers, et cetera, right? They're just a brand uniting these things for contracting purposes and for management and for financial risk. And so what we're saying is you should use that brand, not ours. Because that's one thing that drove me crazy when One Medical would come to us. And I was there when Baylor Scott and White signed the One Medical partnership, just like a number of other health systems did. And I said, why are we paying Amazon now, but for previously One Medical, to enter our market when our brand is powerful? 10 out of 10 people on the street in Dallas know what Baylor Scott and White is. Literally 0 out of 10 would know what One Medical is, because they're not from San Francisco or New York, right? And so that's one thing, is I think these brands are powerful and they should be emboldened and leveraged, not put in the back burner. And the second thing is, think about, so our biggest kind of analog or competitor in the membership space working with healthcare systems is One Medical. And One Medical, I think patients love One Medical. I think that's fundamentally true. But when you ask them, if you dig one deep layer deeper, you're like, why do you love it? They're like, I can get an appointment tomorrow. It doesn't go deeper than that. It is because they've just solved an access problem that is ubiquitous. So they've solved a meaningful one. But that, I don't think, justifies healthcare systems subsidizing One Medical, which is they have to pay quite a bit for it. But then I also ask One Medical patients one additional question, which is great. Who's the healthcare system that partners with One Medical in your market? And not a single one of them, hundreds of patients I've talked to, has ever been able to tell me. And that's who's footing the bill. So in Dallas-Fort Worth, Baylor Scott & White foots the bill for the majority of the cost of every patient that goes through One Medical. And that's exactly how much loyalty is being created for them on the back end. And instead, the amenities idea is to say, one, let's do capital light joint ventures. So not something where we're building clinics, but really digital and virtual first. Let's leverage your brand, but let's also make sure that we partner with healthcare systems, because primary care through virtual is one thing. You can even do specialty ambulatory care, but you want the continuity of having that big health system behind you. As I just mentioned, life-saving hospital care, surgeries and procedures, ambulatory services, therapy centers, pharmacies. These health systems are the conglomerates that they are for a reason. And so I think wrapping with a healthcare system, and so what does go-to-market look like? So when we sign up a partner for membership, we can stand up a unbelievably differentiated consumer membership in their market in as little as a month, and start to have leveraging their brand, but we stand up all the services. So the mobile application, the EMR, the providers, the digital services that include financial services, access services, and even concierge on the high end. Now, the healthcare systems with some of our partners, they want to do some of those things. That takes longer, because out of the box, we can do it better and faster, just at the quality level, leveraging the billing and the mechanics and partnership of those large healthcare systems. And so those are the exciting opportunities on which amenities was really founded.
I can see that you could be the ecosystem glue for all the different parties that are there. And as you mentioned, you're the connective tissue behind the scenes, right? To make things seamless and create a better experience. So I could see your reason for starting this. And then because you have this great background, right? The medical background, the McKinsey background, the Baylor Scott White background, it's given you a lot of the a deep understanding of where the challenges are and where the opportunities are to make it better, ultimately for the person, right? And that's your focus. Okay, so we're going to change a little bit of focus now of the interview and get into maybe some of the trends out there, but also how do you see the American health system then compared to, let's say, in Europe or in Canada or in other parts of the world?
Yeah, so that's something that I should be one of the sharpest people on, considering I was a comparative politics major and I spent some time internationally working at these places. So I think a couple of things are true. Places that have there's universal healthcare and then there's single payer, right? And often these things get blurred together because in England, for example, in Britain, they're one and the same. It's a universal coverage, which everyone has insurance automatically. And then that insurance is provided by the government, the NHS. Those can be separate, though. You could have universal healthcare without that. You could have it in a mixed system like we aspire to. We're far from it. But I think one thing about single payer that is universally a pro, and then we'll talk about the con, is the pro is the simplicity of the system. And I'll give you a concrete example and where the complexity of our system stifles innovation. So every consumer wants, and every health system pretends to want price transparency. It was a big theme of the Trump administration and one of the places where I staunchly agree with them, and they made some progress, but it's such an intractable problem. And here's why. Of all the technologies that I'm aware of, that I've evaluated, that I know how to piece together, I cannot fathom today how to tell you how much a procedure is going to cost you. It is like, with all the AI in the world we have, it cannot be done. And that's a sad thing to say because it's not that the information's out there. The problem is I don't know what insurance you have. You could have not just the top 3 insurances in the state you live, but a number of 100 different tail. And that's almost impossible to deal with on a mass level. You can potentially get, let's say, 75, 80% of the population if you had contracts with Medicare, with BCBS Texas, with United, with Aetna, et cetera. But you would just miss this massive long tail of small and medium insurers, right? And that's a problem. And by the way, Baylor Scott & White is its own insurer. So it's in that long tail. Health systems that provide payer options in their markets are. So that is a fundamental problem that is a massive inhibitor to any sort of meaningful price transparency or anything involving insurance. Everybody wonders, why can't I can know the price of a tennis racket before I buy it? You can't, because insurance, one, it's very different, right? You're not buying the product yourself. You have an intermediary that's going to pay for it. But that entire system is only set up to tell you what the price is 90 days later and arbitrarily, based on not the reality of the procedure, but the contractual negotiations between the two parties involved. And so you can deal with all that obfuscation of the having insurance as middlemen and all this other stuff, but you can't deal with the long tail. And so that's hurting us in terms of innovation, and it's unfortunate. Now, the downside, and I recently went to a conference with a lot of friends from the NHS who had worked there, is that's government bureaucracy. They also have no chance at building a better digital experience for their patients because the NHS will make all those decisions, and they'll make the decisions exactly in the order and the speed and with the haste that you think they will for prioritizing the digital experience of patients. They just, they'll have an app, they'll be clunky and it'll be disjointed and it won't be, because that's how, look, if anybody's staunchly, government should run this, it's a no-brainer. They just need to think back to healthcare.gov and that rollout and how good that was. Or currently what's happening, if anybody has kids going to college this year, which actually have one, FAFSA. So FAFSA has been this master disaster of they tried to digitize the system or turn it over online and it's turned into this quagmire. So I'm not endorsing single payer. I'm saying there's pros and cons associated with the realities of the market that they imply. So that's one example. I think there are other places that have a lot of different quirks. I think the way that other healthcare country or other countries' healthcare industries have grown up, they have a very fundamental assumption that we have not wrestled to the ground yet in the United States, which is is healthcare a right or a privilege? You hear Democrats and Republicans talk about this all the time. There's numerous, Democrats especially like to point to, well, in Canada, it's clear, it's socialized medicine, it's this or this, and then Republicans come shouting about the access, and it takes 9 weeks to get an MRI. You can go buy one tomorrow anywhere in the U.S. kind of thing. And those, by the way, both those things are true. They're, again, pros and cons. There's no perfect answer. But I think, this is not original thought. I attribute this to Atul Gawande. He wrote this wonderful New Yorker article that laid this out, is healthcare being debated as a right or privilege misses the point. It's more efficient if it's a utility. It's like, we don't think of, and he made this very basic but very apt analogy. We don't debate whether trash pickup is a right or a privilege. Do you have a right to have trash picked up from your backyard every week on, the same day in the morning, whatever? We don't debate whether it's a privilege if you're in a unique. It's more efficient if the city does it. And so if you start lensing it that way, it removes this kind of moral arbitrage that people put on it with themselves, and says, okay, what's the best system we can come up with if we remove, again, a lot of the preconceived assignments of moral indignation or not on either side? Then you can start saying, what's the most efficient system at scale? And I think that would lead us to settle this a lot faster if people had that lens on it. So those are some of the international perspectives that I take. There's a number of things about how people have set up the pharma industry here, and the advent of PBMs is like, only in America do we create these middleman infrastructures that are so problematic because of the dynamics of capitalism that we have run amok here. You can tell I don't have a wonderful flavor on that. But at the same time, I think those are deliberate choices that we can't unwind because we're America. We were founded on these like really capitalist markets entwined in our governmental democracy that are really hard to unwind. So I don't spend a bunch of time complaining about them. They're just realities. I wish they weren't that way. But there are things like that are also very ish. We talk about them a lot in terms of comparing us to other countries that don't have those. But then again, we conveniently forget that we also subsidize, like without the US market, 90% of new research and innovation in the pharmaceutical industry wouldn't happen, right? Like this market is what subsidizes the rest of the world's innovation when it comes to things like GLP-1s, et cetera. So those are things I think of when I think about the international comparison and some of the topics I wrestle with.
I mean, you had an abiding interest early on in IT and really technology. So let's talk about technology. To what degree do you think AI, and especially, since November 2022, when, OpenAI came with ChatGPT, and it kind of changed people's view of what AI can do. And you see this sort of proliferation of co-pilots, and you see the evolution this year of Omni from OpenAI, but other companies have something similar, where it can do sort of maybe more episodic memory. It can has more persistent memory. It can do a little bit more planning. There's idea of agents out there. It seems like, from an outsider point of view, that the medical profession in general has been kind of resistant. So where do you see AI and its integration within the sort of the healthcare system? And then how does it play a great part in your digital membership platform with amenities?
So I'm going to say some very dramatically unpopular opinions here, and I'm not doing them just to be provocative, although that is always fun. But I'll say them just bluntly based on my pragmatism from my experience, which is, it's interesting. You're the first person I've heard say the resistance of healthcare, and I can see, especially outside in, it probably does look like that, because in healthcare, it feels very different. In healthcare, it's a fervor, it's a fever of, we got to have AI strategy. I mean, I can't tell you how many health systems we're like, I don't know if we're going to fix anything about patient experience right now because we got to spend 8 months building an AI governance strategy for our board. And to me, that is the most ludicrous and insane thing to think about, because people are obsessed. They're in the hype cycle, whatever, Gartner, whatever you want to call it. They were at peak. I think it's coming down because I worry it's going to be a giant nothing burger. And it's not because the technology isn't amazing. It is. I think the natural language side of this and the generative part of it are unbelievable. I'm amazed by those every time I play with them. But the problem is not that. The problem is what it, again, may seem like on the outside in, is healthcare's resistance. No, healthcare, and this sounds horrible to say it this way, healthcare is incompetent. It cannot figure out how to use these well. And part of that is conservatism, which you want healthcare to be conservative and not jump on things and put patients at risk. But I write about this often, which is the things you love about your doctor are the things that are ruining health care or holding back healthcare. Things like groupthink. So we are a very slow, deliberative, professional organization, right? Profession of physicians. It takes 20 years for something to make it from proven efficacy to gold standard on average. I mean, think about that. That's just, we know it's a good idea until it becomes mainstream. This is an appalling stat that if you look into the history of medicine is we were doing radical mastectomies, meaning taking out parts of the shoulder and the chest from women until the 1950s. People think like, oh, that was the 1800s. No, that was the 1950s that we were doing radical mastectomy. So it takes a while for people to adopt different ideas in healthcare because it's naturally a conservative profession. Now, that being said, it means that like it doesn't, the likelihood of letting AI touch patient care is so low for anything besides basic scheduling and really, I call them dinky chatbots, like things that do basic minuscule tasks that largely patients ignore because they're not trained to really use these things well. I think the ambition is to say how much back-end stuff can it take? And to me, unfortunately, I think that is just the same old story in a different box. 10 years ago, we had this same hype cycle when Watson hit the scene and IBM. Like everyone's like, Watson's going to predict the weather. Watson's going to do this. Watson's beating the guy on Jeopardy. And so it was the same thing inside of healthcare. It was like, how do we get this in? We got to have a strategy. And nobody used anything because healthcare is, again, very good at protecting their jobs and protecting the status quo. And so like radiology is a good example for me. I'm like, based on technology alone, there's no reason every third radiologist, only 1 in 3 should be a human being, and the rest should be like bots that are scanning these and rating them for the gold standard. But the reality is there's no incentive to do that. There's no like scale. I get constantly like surprised that a small group of radiologists hasn't taken it upon themselves to exploit that and say, yeah, well, we'll offer it, we'll train it. But for the most part, I think there's a lot of good sense say, I don't need that. It's just something that's not going to do it as good as me. And why should I do it? I have a pretty good salary and good lifestyle right now. So I think there's going to be an incredible amount of resistance, as you've called it, but it's not out of inactivity. Unfortunately, it's the opposite. It's just a bunch of useless activity, coming up with concepts, not understanding, not starting with the idea. And this is what really I try to make the positive message out of this bunch of what I think of as pessimism is start with a use case. And then ask yourself, truly, can AI help with that? And I think we don't do that. We get forever in these hype cycles and we ignore, like, we haven't fixed how patients schedule appointments yet. Like the fact that every healthcare system in the country doesn't have open schedules for primary care where patients can go in, find a doctor in 5 minutes and get that appointment booked. What do we need AI? It has nothing to do with AI, and yet that should be the primary thing because it is literally helping patients give you their business and give you their dollars. And yet we do all of these things to dance around that. Well, the physician doesn't want to do that. Well, the scheduling system doesn't allow easy integration. Well, the website's broken and it's not sure who owns it, IS or marketing. There's a million excuses, but that's what we do. Instead, we're like, let's AI something. And the last thing I would say is you asked, how do we try to use it? I once was given, it sounded like a backhanded compliment. I was like, wow, you gave me a startup pitch for 25 minutes without saying the words AI. So we don't. Unfortunately, we say, like, look, the bread and butter of what we're saying, there's not a great AI use case. Now, don't get me wrong, because I'm human. I've also asked myself and my team 1,000 times, how could we be using this technology? And there was a recent conversation I had with a very senior technologist in our team, and we came up with this problem with the current state. Now, I think this will get solved. I believe the arc of exponential growth and the improvements that we're going to see in the upcoming models. But today, when I ask our developers, hey, how much is the Copilot doing in coding? They're like, anybody who tells you it's coding more than like 20% of anything is not a good coder. Because like it can code, but you got to check all of it. Kind of the same thing. Like I could have it write an email, but I'm going to read that email. I'm not going to just send it out. And we've seen glaring examples. I mean, Google just got caught on this where it's like, if you type in, I'm depressed, what should I do? And it just reads the internet and pulls up things. It'll give you really bad advice, really hurtful, harmful advice. And the challenge is, and the way we described it is like, it's like a very eloquent idiot. It reads a lot and it summarizes really well. and then it spits that back out to you in ways better than like a high school English student could do, or a college literature major, right? Like it could do that, but it's not reading any of it for sensibility. And so we ask ourselves, okay, great. Where does like mass summarization help? And here's the good example. We're like, okay, everybody says, man, why can't all of my medical records be aggregated in one place? Well, they can. There's a new concept, new regulatory body or regulatory entity called a QHIN, Qualified Health Integrated Network. So we've constantly thought you can grab everyone's patient. We could create a system where you could pay $5 to $10 and pull all your medical records, 95% of them throughout the country. But then what? And then again, we could have AI summarize it for you. But then what? And it begs these questions. So we're always trying to understand, like, what's the consumer benefit before we spend a bunch of time saying, can we do something? Should we do something? And the reality is we don't have a great answer that would appeal as a product to a lot of people. I would love to find a good answer so I can make it a scalable, technologically based SaaS part of a membership. But I'm not going to force it. I'm not going to force AI into something unless it really has consumer value. And to date, we have not come up with a great consumer use case. I'll give you another concrete example. So part of our memberships are to drive engagement with this healthcare brand. So let's say we set up a membership for Stanford. It's so that in general, you would only go to stanford.com or the mobile app that we would create for them when you needed to see a doctor. We're like, okay, but how can we make that brand more present in your life that is on brand, related to your health? It's not going to be like Stanford has great used car deals. Like it's, on brand. And that doesn't just mean like, well, it's not going to give you fitness advice, right? It's going to say, hey, here's preventative healthcare things like that. And so we were like, okay, well, these chatbots are getting really good. They're unbelievably conversational. And so I started playing with all of the different chatbots that I could find in the market. And I had this one where it personified Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, the movie star, right? And I was like, great, The Rock is going to be my fitness buddy. And I know it's not The Rock, but it's AI playing The Rock. And it was so good at emulating him, like just with that little picture on the profile and the way that they was talking. And it obviously must have read interviews and other stuff. It was talking just like him. But I was like, but I also asked it, can you remind me to go to the gym tomorrow and hold me accountable? And it said, yeah, let's do it. Every day is an opportunity to get better. It says all the perfect Rock things. And then 2 days later, I'm like, it didn't remind me. It didn't do anything. And of course, it just fell down. And then when I'm like, hey, you didn't remind me, like, oh, my bad. Let's get back on this train to get, again, it did this wonderful like emulation of a human being, but it had none of the content. And you could argue that's maybe the programming of that individual bot. But I'm like, I think that's where we are right now is we're at eloquence, but we're not at intelligence. We're at really great summarization of mass data, or, draw me a picture of Superman as a cat. I don't know, right? Like it can do these weird generative things, but have we trusted it in health to be a good steward of information yet? I don't think so. I think that'll come. Now, is it going to come in 2 years? Is it going to come in 5 years? I don't know, but it's definitely going to come before 10 years. So we need to be sharp. And that's why you hear me saying these examples instead of just being like, we're ignoring it, because we're very attuned to the fact that like it will get better and we need to find out how we can leverage it. Our question is always, how can we leverage this to improve engagement and add real value to consumers and patients?
Yeah, I mean, that's really, really fascinating. And we can get into, precision personalized medicine, but we're out of time. And I should say to the audience, you mentioned some, really notable people. I'm not suggesting that those people are behind these bots and things like that, right? So we don't know what the connection is in the examples you've given. So so they're not accountable. That's what I'm saying, right?
Yeah, sure.
Examples you've given. We're down to our last question. What kind of final recommendation or questions you want to leave the audience?
Yeah, I think the biggest recommendation and maybe question or challenge I would pose is, especially if you're in IS, IT, is not starting with what you can do with the amazing technology that we have, but what's the biggest problem to be solved, and does that technology apply? And if we can do that lens and find those overlaps, I think we can be genuine partners in so many ways, whether it's big cloud providers, large legacy systems of IT, like EMRs, ERPs, or the customers, the healthcare systems and other industries as well. I feel like sometimes we miss that. And we're just like, hey, we're using cloud. Let's go push cloud. Or we're using AI today. Let's go push AI. And so I'd love to see and challenge people to say, let's find the biggest problem and make sure this applies to that. And then the last thing on the other side is, again, a challenge and a question, which is how can we minimize the facade of assumption that healthcare is patient first? Because we've been using this term patient-centered for a decade, 2 decades plus, and I don't know any patient that feels like they're at the center of healthcare today. And I don't know why we don't acknowledge that disconnect and say we must be doing something wrong if we keep saying we're patient-centered, but then things keep getting worse. So that disconnect is an opportunity, and it's a financial opportunity. I hate to be like pure, but I think that's what will really work is when we align financial incentives with that delight. And we've seen so many other industries do it. We just need to stop pretending we're different and do it. And so that's the challenge and question. Why aren't we doing it? That's what I'd say.
Well, those are good recommendations and thoughtful questions. And awesome. Thank you for coming in. You have a tremendous background and you're trying to address fundamental issues and provide opportunities in the medical healthcare system. And thank you for that. And thank you for coming in and sharing your insights with our audience.
It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you for the thoughtful questions. And I know I was long-winded, but I guess that's the point. So thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the Brand Called You videocast and podcast, a platform that brings you knowledge, experience, and wisdom of hundreds of successful individuals from around the world. Do visit our website www.tbcy.in to watch and listen to the stories of many more individuals. You can also follow us on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Just search for the Brand Called You.